Sometimes there are video games that come out at the wrong time. These are the ones that were heavily criticized during their initial release or left many fans disappointed. Yet after a couple of years, these titles gain a fan following, and all of a sudden their critical reception takes a 180. Now, why does this happen? One reason is that with a critical second look, people learn to appreciate what these games are rather than what they wanted them to be. These video games were disliked during their initial release, but over time have had a considerable critical re-evaluation. I'm Jess from WhatCulture, and here are 10 video games that were vindicated by history. Number 10. Alien Resurrection. In the 90s, it was crazy to think that the first-person genre could ever come to consoles. Sure, there were ports of Doom while GoldenEye 007 was a success for the Nintendo 64, but these were exceptions to the rule. Alien Resurrection, a tie-in to the 1997 movie of the same name, was one of the early attempts to bring the genre to consoles. Although its atmosphere was praised, contemporary journalists drew criticism for the game's difficulty and pacing. One common complaint was its dual analog stick control scheme, which was unheard of at the time. You see, one of the biggest challenges of console games in the late 90s was translating the PC's precise keyboard and mouse controls onto a controller. This point of criticism ironically became the gold standard in console FPS games years later, as Halo Combat Evolved would use this method to revolutionize the industry and genre. And though the Xbox original proved that the genre could thrive on consoles, Alien Resurrection eventually got recognition for being one of the first games to implement this control scheme. Number 9. Tekken 4. Tekken was the PlayStation's flagship fighting game in the 90s. The series became one of the most successful in its genre to implement 3D mechanics and featured numerous iconic characters like Jin, Yoshimitsu, and King. When the franchise transitioned into the next generation of consoles, its first entry was a port of Tekken Tag Tournament, which was a tag game built on Tekken 3's engine. It would then take Tekken 4 to be the next big step for the franchise. It unfortunately ended up being considered the worst in the series. The game was criticized for implementing uneven terrain, which would render high attacks ineffective, featured walls in its stages that players could exploit by performing inescapable combos, and swapped out many character-specific grapples for a position switch instead. Tekken Tag's huge roster was also cut down considerably. Though its mechanics are now divisive rather than unanimously derided, fans of the series later appreciated the game's attempts at trying to switch up the franchise's formula. At the same time, its dark story is considered a highlight, while the cast's unconventional outfits are much more liked today. Number 8. Castlevania 2: Simon's Quest. Castlevania 2: Simon's Quest is a game that sticks out from the beloved Nintendo Entertainment System trilogy. While the original and Castlevania 3: Dracula's Curse both have similar gameplay styles, this first sequel is the odd one out. For starters, rather than a straightforward side-scroller, the game is more about exploration and role-playing. Simon Belmont can talk to numerous NPCs, sell items to vendors, and upgrade his abilities. Another notable aspect of Simon's Quest is the day and night system, a mechanic that turns villagers into more formidable foes during the evening. These elements factor into why Castlevania 2 is considered the most polarizing entry in the series. At the time, players found it very confusing and often needed game guides in order to finish any individual aspect. Inversely, its boss battles are considered pathetically easy, with Simon's rematch with Dracula feeling underwhelming. And yet, despite its reputation as one of the weaker entries, Castlevania 2 has gained respect for introducing elements that would be present in future titles. The game's non-linear level design was compared to the Metroid system, which would eventually lead to the Metroidvania style of gameplay that was first introduced in Castlevania Symphony of the Night. Number 7. Killer 7. Killer 7 is an action-adventure video game directed by beloved video game designer Suda51. The title features a unique visual art style consisting of cel-shaded graphics with on-rail shooting mechanics and puzzle solving as its gameplay loop. Another noteworthy feature of the game was the Killer 7, which had different abilities and personalities. But due to its numerous unconventional aspects mentioned above, the game is considered a cult classic rather than a straight-up hit. Contemporary reviews at the time found the control scheme limited, its gameplay restricting, and the art style an acquired taste. And while it was a creative addition to the medium, its art house approach made it inaccessible to casual gamers, and suffered from poor sales due to being released on one of Nintendo's lowest-ending consoles, the GameCube. But in the years to come, Killer 7 gained a fan following for those who played it due to its unconventional style and nature. The game even led to the release of Suda51's No More Heroes, a series that thankfully fared better commercially than Killer 7. To cap things off, the game even had an HD Windows release in 2018. Number 6. Battlefield 4. The Battlefield series became EA's flagship first-person shooter in the 2010s, and it was Call of Duty's primary competitor. Its main advantage was the use of the Frostbite engine, which allowed players to commit unparalleled amounts of environmental destruction. In 2013, Battlefield 4 was released, but became infamous for having one of the worst launches in gaming history. Across multiple platforms, the title was riddled with bugs, glitches, and other technical issues that plagued gamers. This even led to some legal action, with EA becoming the target of multiple lawsuits, questioning whether the company had actually deceived investors regarding the state of the game. Thankfully, DICE managed to turn things around by patching the game up, which eventually led to players realizing how deep and effective Battlefield 4's mechanics really were. Gamers were also rewarded with numerous DLC packs that were well received, with some released for free. And with the release of more divisive entries like Battlefield 5 and Battlefield 2042, the game has since risen in its ranks, considered one of the best in the series and one of the best military shooters out there. Number 5. Sonic Unleashed. Sonic the Hedgehog 2006 is considered the lowest point in the franchise due to its unfinished state and began the series' true dark age. To rise up from the controversy, Sonic Team released Sonic Unleashed in 2008, which attempted to reinvent the franchise. The game features two gameplay styles, with day and night stages. For the day, Unleash introduced the boost gameplay, allowing Sonic to move faster than ever before on a whole new game engine. At night, on the other hand, Sonic transforms into the Werehog, which placed emphasis on combat and traditional platforming. Unfortunately, Sonic Unleashed was not well received during its release, with some reviews even considering it worse than Sonic 06. Its graphics, while visually stunning, suffered from frame rate drops and slowdown. The Werehog especially received criticism, with many already brushing it off due to the ridiculous premise. But in the years to come, Sonic fans would take a second look at Unleashed and now consider it one of the best 3D entries of the bunch. Its boost gameplay is lauded for featuring multiple pathways while taking a risk versus reward approach, and many fans adore how quick reflexes are directly rewarded. Even the visuals remain stunning today, with Unleashed running smoothly on systems like the Xbox Series X. Number 4. The Legend of Zelda: Majora's Mask. The Legend of Zelda: Majora's Mask was the follow-up to the beloved Ocarina of Time and was released in 2000. With its predecessor being so beloved and considered one of the iconic N64 titles out there, it's no surprise that expectations were high. Sadly, during its release, while the game received critical acclaim from journalists, fan reception was more divisive. Majora's Mask had a dark aesthetic, which was different from other Zelda games, while the approaching moon was deemed too scary for youngsters. At the same time, its 3-day cycle was scrutinized, as this meant you could miss out on side quests and other activities. The game's also infamous for using reused assets from Ocarina of Time, as development was shorter than its predecessor. The title, however, has of course received much love from the fan base in the years since, and has been re-released on other platforms. Majora's Mask was released for the Nintendo GameCube in 2003 and even onto the Wii Virtual Console in 2009. Like many Zelda games between Ocarina of Time and Breath of the Wild, the title went from being divisive and unconventional into a beloved entry in the series. Number 3. Vanquish. Vanquish is the brainchild of Shinji Mikami, the creator of beloved hits like Resident Evil, Dino Crisis, and The Evil Within. The game features numerous similarities to bullet hell shooters and introduces two features: the boost slide for increased mobility and AR mode that allows you to slow down time. The title's primary focus is movement, penalizing players who prefer sticking to cover. On release, the game was a financial failure due to a lack of marketing and a short length. While critics praised Vanquish, the title never got the commercial success it truly deserved, which is a shame because it was a creative third-person shooter. Its boost slide would even become a staple in multiple titles like Titanfall and the more sci-fi-oriented Call of Duty sequels. Time would be kind to Vanquish, however, as the game was eventually put on PlayStation Games on Demand, leading to players discovering the game for free and resulting in a Steam port in 2017. The title would even get support from Sega during its 10th anniversary, with an HD remaster released for the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One. Number 2. Street Fighter 3. Street Fighter III is considered one of the greatest fighting games of all time and set the gold standard for the genre. Though the game received a prequel through the Street Fighter Alpha games, fans were eagerly awaiting for the next true evolution of the series. This would come in the form of Street Fighter III New Generation, but it was not the hit gamers wanted or expected. For one, Capcom introduced new features such as the Super Art system and the parry, a feature that required precise timing. These mechanics deepened the competitive gameplay, but at the expense of accessibility. Most notoriously, Street Fighter III abandoned most of the beloved World Warriors, save for Ryu and Ken. Gone were icons like Chun-Li, Guile, and M. Bison, and instead we were left with newbies like Alex and Gil. It also didn't help that arcades weren't doing well at the time, which meant that the title was less successful than its predecessor. The game was saved in time by its updates, with Street Fighter III Third Strike being considered a series high. Opinions were also softened by the competitive Evo scene, which showed how deep and tactical these mechanics always were in the hands of experts. Number 1. Super Mario Sunshine. Following Super Mario 64 was a gargantuan task for any developer, as it revolutionized 3D platformers and is considered one of the greatest of all time. With odds like this, it's no wonder that Super Mario Sunshine was a divisive entry upon its release. To start things off, the game was unconventional by Mario standards. It was the only title in the series to feature voice acting, while staples like Goombas and Koopas were noticeably absent. But the biggest aspect of Super Mario Sunshine that was scrutinized was FLUDD. This water jetpack was the main feature of the game, and helped Mario traverse through Isle Delfino at the cost of losing beloved abilities like the long jump. Its level progression system was also disliked for its linear nature, as players had to obtain 7 shine sprites before every confrontation with Shadow Mario. Nowadays, with the release of more traditional 3D Mario games, Sunshine is seen in a better light for trying to attempt something new. While not all of it works, the game is at least appreciated for definitely being one of the more experimental Mario titles of all time. That's the end of our list, but let me know down in that comment section if you can think of any more video games that were vindicated by history. As always, I've been Jess from WhatCulture. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. If you like it, you can say hi to me on my Twitter account where I'm @JessMcDonald, but make sure you stay tuned to us here for plenty more great gaming lists.